At an upscale jewelry store in Brookhaven, a black teenager steps inside, eyes filled with excitement as he searches for the perfect gift for his little sister. But his joy is short-lived. The moment he crosses the threshold, suspicion follows. The store clerk watches him closely, her gaze sharp and unwelcoming. And when he accidentally drops a bracelet, that suspicion morphs into something far worse, an outright accusation. Within minutes, the police arrive, handcuffs at the ready, believing every word of the clerk's story without question. But what they don't realize is that this boy is not alone. He has a powerful ally, his mother. And she is about to turn the entire situation on its head in a way no one saw coming. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in Brookhaven, a quiet suburban town where life moved at a leisurely pace. Families strolled through the park, children's laughter filled the air as they raced toward the swings, and neighbors exchanged greetings while browsing the local farmers market. The sun bathed the streets in golden light, making everything seem picture-perfect. But for Malik Johnson, today wasn't just another weekend, it was the day he had been waiting for. His sister Amani was turning 10, and he had spent months saving up to buy her something truly special. Malik had been working extra shifts at Griffin's coffee house, stashing away every tip, every dollar from his paychecks, just so he could afford the perfect gift. And now he finally had enough. A silver charm bracelet from Lancaster Jewelers, the most prestigious jewelry store in town. He had passed by it countless times, pressing his nose against the glass, picturing the way Amani's face would light up when she saw it. Today was the day. He patted the wallet in his pocket, reassured by the weight of his hard-earned money. This wasn't just about a bracelet. It was about love. About proving that he could give his sister something beautiful, despite everything their family had been through. As he neared the store, the pristine glass windows reflected the busy streets behind him. He hesitated for a moment, instinctively adjusting his hoodie. Though it was unzipped, revealing a neatly pressed polo shirt underneath, he knew how people reacted when they saw a young black man in a hoodie. He shook off the thought, not today, just go in, buy the bracelet, and leave. Taking a deep breath, he pulled open the heavy glass door. A soft chime echoed through the store. Inside, Lancaster Jewelers was exactly as he had imagined. Sleek glass display cases, velvet-lined shelves, and rows of gold and silver gleaming under bright, almost blinding lights. The scent of polished wood and expensive cologne filled the air. Most of the customers were older, well-dressed women, their diamond rings glinting as they admired necklaces that cost more than Malik had ever made in a year. He ignored their subtle, curious glances, keeping his focus on the bracelet he had come for. Behind the counter stood Catherine Whitmore, a middle-aged white woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and eyes that missed nothing. At first her expression was neutral, but the moment she saw Malik, something in her face changed. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers curled slightly against the counter, and her once bored eyes now carried something unmistakable: scrutiny. Malik felt it instantly. That shift, that silent but deafening question that always hung in the air when people like her looked at people like him. "What are you doing here?" He had seen that look before. He had felt the weight of unspoken suspicion in grocery stores, in clothing shops, even when walking down his own neighborhood streets. But he refused to let it stop him. He stepped forward with a polite smile and pointed at the bracelet inside the glass case. "I'd like to see that one, please." His voice was steady, controlled, the way his mother had always taught him to speak in situations like this. Catherine didn't move. Instead, she folded her arms, tilting her head slightly. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice laced with condescension. "That one's quite expensive." Malik's stomach tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, revealing the neatly folded bills he had worked so hard to save. "I'm sure," he said firmly. "I have the money right here." Catherine's eyes flicked to the cash. Her lips curled slightly, as if the sight of it offended her. But instead of relaxing, she seemed to tense even more. Her fingers twitched near the phone on the counter. Still, she made no move to grab the bracelet. Instead, she let out a quiet, almost amused scoff. "And where exactly did you get all that money?" Her voice was casual, almost indifferent, but the accusation beneath it was as sharp as a blade. Malik stiffened. "Excuse me?" he asked, though he already knew where this was going. Catherine arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "It's just a lot of cash for someone your age," she said, her gaze locked onto his face. "Did you, I don't know, borrow it from someone? Maybe find it lying around?" Malik clenched his jaw. He inhaled slowly, willing himself to stay calm. He had done nothing wrong. "I work at Griffin's Coffee House," he said, pronouncing each word carefully. "I saved up for this." Catherine made a small noise of disbelief, shaking her head slightly. She hummed, tapping her nails against the counter. "And you expect me to believe that?" Malik swallowed down the anger rising in his throat. "Yes," he said flatly. Catherine let out a dry chuckle like she had just heard the most ridiculous thing in the world. Catherine finally moved toward the display case, letting out a slow, exaggerated sigh. "Well, I suppose I should be flattered," she mused, her voice thick with sarcasm. "You really thought you could fool me." She pulled open the case with deliberate slowness, shaking her head as if she had already made up her mind. "I've been working here a long time, kid. I know when something doesn't add up." Malik's hands curled into fists at his sides. He forced himself to unclench them. This was supposed to be simple. He hadn't come here to be humiliated. "Can I just see the bracelet, please?" His voice was tight, his patience thinning. Catherine sighed again, louder this time, as if he was inconveniencing her. But she finally reached for the velvet tray, placing it on the counter with a firm thud. "Be careful with it," she warned, her tone sharp. "That's worth more than what you probably make in a year." Malik's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He reached out, carefully picking up the bracelet, feeling the cool silver against his fingertips. It was perfect. Exactly what he had imagined. He turned it slightly, watching the charms dangle, picturing Amani's face when she saw it. But then the metal slipped. The bracelet tumbled from his fingers, hitting the glass counter with a soft clink before bouncing off and landing on the tiled floor below. The moment it happened, Malik's breath caught in his throat before he could even move to pick it up. "Oh my God, I knew it!" Catherine's shriek tore through the store like a siren. Every head in the room turned. Malik's eyes widened. "Wait! I knew you were up to something!" Catherine jabbed a finger at him, her face twisting in outrage. "You were trying to pocket it, weren't you? Thought you could get away with it?" Malik's stomach dropped. "What? No, But she wasn't listening. She lunged for the store phone, her fingers dialing frantically. "Get the police here, now, now!" she barked into the receiver. "We've got a thief, young black male, hoodie, tried to steal from us." Malik stood frozen. The weight of her words slammed into him like a freight train. The room had gone silent, but the air was thick. Judgment, suspicion, fear. He could feel it in the way the customers shifted, their postures stiffening. A woman clutched her purse a little tighter. An older man narrowed his eyes, shaking his head as if this was just confirmation of what he had already believed to be true. Malik's mind screamed at him to say something, to defend himself. But he knew no one in that room would believe him, not over her. And then the wail of sirens cut through the quiet afternoon. They grew louder, closer. Malik's pulse pounded against his ribs, the reality of the moment crashing down on him. He had always known this could happen. He had seen it before, on the news, in whispered conversations, in the fear that crept into his mother's voice whenever she reminded him to be careful. But knowing it could happen and living it were two entirely different things. His breath came shallow, his fingers twitching at his sides. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to move, to run, to fight back against the blatant lie spilling from Catherine's lips. But he did none of those things. He stood still, forcing himself to breathe, because anything else, any sudden movement, any misplaced word, could make this worse. Catherine's voice rang out again, sharp and commanding. "Yes, right now! I need officers at Lancaster Jewelers immediately!" Her free hand clutched the counter, her posture stiff, as though she were the victim in all of this. Her gaze flicked toward Malik, her lips curling into a smirk of pure satisfaction, like she had been waiting for this moment, like she had been expecting it. And then, lowering her voice just enough to sound urgent, "He's getting aggressive." Malik's stomach lurched, his fists clenched at his sides. Aggressive? He had barely spoken. He hadn't even moved. And yet she was painting a picture that everyone in that room was more than willing to believe. He felt it in the way the customers backed away, their gazes darting between him and Catherine. None of them questioned her words. A woman in a floral dress pulled her purse closer. An older man shook his head, as if this was nothing more than a predictable outcome. Malik swallowed hard. His eyes flicked to the bracelet on the floor, the same one that had slipped from his fingers only moments ago. And now? Now it was something else entirely. Now it was evidence. A symbol of something far more dangerous. He took a shaky breath and looked Catherine dead in the eyes. I didn't steal anything," he said, his voice low, controlled, but laced with barely restrained fury. "You know that." Catherine scoffed, folding her arms across her chest. "Oh, please, don't play innocent now." Her gaze flicked down to his hoodie, his jeans, his sneakers. And then, with a smirk, "I know your kind." The words burned. Malik didn't have to ask what she meant. He already knew. Catherine shrugged, feigning innocence. "What? You're acting all offended now? I'm just stating the facts." She gestured vaguely to the store. "We deal with thieves every day, and I don't need to guess which ones are the problem." Something inside Malik snapped. Something cold, sharp, suffocating. He wanted to scream, to tell her how wrong she was, how vile. But the words choked in his throat. Because he knew nothing he said would matter. Because in Catherine's eyes, he had already been convicted. In the eyes of everyone watching, Malik Johnson was already guilty. The glass door of Lancaster Jewelers swung open with a sharp gust of air, and 2 uniformed police officers stormed inside. The atmosphere in the store shifted instantly, an invisible current of tension crackling like a live wire. Conversations died mid-sentence, movements stilled. And suddenly, all eyes were on Malik. "Thanks him!" Catherine shrieked, her voice shrill with conviction, pointing at him as if he were a fugitive straight off a wanted poster. "He tried to steal from me." Malik barely had time to react before one of the officers, a tall, burly man with graying hair, his badge reading Sergeant Blake, stepped toward him, already reaching for his handcuffs. "Sir, I need you to put your hands where I can see them." Malik's breath caught, his fingers twitched at his sides, but he didn't move. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to run, to protect himself. But he forced himself to stay still. Blake's tone sharpened. "I said, hands where I can see them. I didn't do anything." Malik's voice was steady, steadier than he felt. Catherine let out an exaggerated scoff. "Are you seriously going to stand there and argue? After I caught you? After you—" She gestured wildly toward the bracelet on the floor. "Tried to pocket that?" Then, with an unmistakable bite in her voice, "The nerve of you people." Malik flinched. "You people." The second officer, a younger man with sharp eyes, Officer Doyle, hesitated, his gaze flicked between Malik, Catherine, and the discarded bracelet. Unlike Blake, he didn't move in immediately. And Malik saw it, that flicker of doubt in his expression. Doyle wasn't completely convinced. But it didn't matter. Blake was already stepping closer, handcuffs at the ready, his face void of hesitation. "Son, I'm gonna need you to step outside." Malik's pulse pounded against his skull. His breathing was shallow. His mind raced through every possible outcome, and every single one ended the same way, with him on the ground, with someone shouting, with a headline that started with, "Black teen arrested after attempted theft." He knew exactly how these stories played out. Across the room, Catherine's smirk widened. She folded her arms across her chest, her posture relaxed, victorious. She thought she had already won. Malik exhaled sharply, forced himself to keep his voice even. "Call my mother." Blake scoffed, shaking his head. "Kid, you can make your phone call at the station." "No." Malik's voice was firmer now, louder, cutting through the tension. "Call my mother. Now!" Catherine rolled her eyes. "Oh, sure, let him call Mommy," she sneered. "And who is she, some public defender, an activist? What's she gonna do, tell him to scream for justice?" She let out a dry, humorless laugh. Malik ignored her. Slowly, not too fast, not sudden, he reached into his pocket, his movements deliberate, calculated. He pulled out his phone, dialed with steady hands. "Mom, I need you at Lancaster Jewelers, now." Blake's brows furrowed slightly, but he still didn't seem concerned. Doyle, however, shifted. He must have noticed something. The way Malik wasn't begging. The way he wasn't pleading. The way he wasn't panicking, despite the fact that he was in very real danger. No, Malik wasn't afraid. He was waiting. Minutes stretched into eternity. The air in the store was thick, tense. Catherine tapped her foot impatiently. Blake sighed, his grip on the handcuffs loosening, just slightly. Doyle checked his watch. The customers had mostly backed away, whispering among themselves, some discreetly pulling out their phones. And then, the door swung open. A woman walked in, tall, commanding, the kind of presence that silenced an entire room without a single word. A navy moon suit hugged her frame, tailored to perfection. Her heels clicked against the tile with precise, deliberate steps. Her sharp eyes, so much like Malik's, scanned the scene before her. She held up a badge, flashed it with an authority that left no room for doubt. "I'm Dr. Simone Johnson." Her voice cut through the store like steel. "Chief of Police for Brookhaven PD." Then, with a slow, deliberate turn, she locked eyes with Blake and gestured toward Malik. "And this," she said, her voice unwavering, "is my son." Silence. A long, suffocating silence. The weight of Simone Johnson's words pressed down on everyone in the room. The officers, the customers, Catherine. Malik barely breathed, watching as recognition dawned on their faces. Blake stiffened. His grip on the cuffs faltered. His stance, once unwavering, suddenly uncertain. Doyle exhaled sharply, his posture shifting, calculating his next move. But it was Catherine Whitmore, who reacted the most violently. Catherine Whitmore's smirk vanished in an instant. Her expression twisted, shock, anger, desperation, all flashing across her face as if her mind was scrambling to process what she had just heard. She blinked hard, as if hoping she had misheard, as if refusing to accept the undeniable truth that the young black man she had so easily condemned was the son of the most powerful person in the room. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Whoa, what?" she stammered, her voice stripped of its earlier venom, now laced with something dangerously close to panic. But Chief Simone Johnson didn't so much as glance at her. Her eyes remained fixed on Sergeant Blake, piercing, unwavering. "Sergeant." Her voice was calm, measured, but underneath it dangerous. "I assume you have a reasonable explanation for why my son is standing here surrounded while you reach for your handcuffs before even asking him a single question?" Blake shifted uncomfortably, his jaw clenching. His hand, still gripping the cuffs, slowly lowered, but he didn't let go entirely. "Ma'am, we received a call reporting an attempted theft," he said, his voice clipped, defensive. "We responded accordingly." Simone tilted her head slightly. Her eyes narrowed. "You responded accordingly?" A pause. "And by accordingly you mean walking in here, seeing a young black man and immediately deciding he was guilty?" Blake bristled. "That's not what happened." "Really?" Simone's tone was cool, sharp as a blade, "because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that." Catherine finally found her voice, and when she spoke, it snapped with desperation. "I called because he tried to steal from me," she blurted, pointing at Malik, her voice rising in pitch. He dropped the bracelet and was clearly about to take it. "I stopped him just in time. I did what any responsible citizen would do. I called the police before he could run off with my merchandise." Simone exhaled slowly. For the first time since she entered, her gaze moved to Malik. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't even tried to explain himself. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes told her everything. The anger simmering beneath his carefully controlled surface. The exhaustion, the frustration, the knowledge that even as the son of one of the highest-ranking law enforcement officials in the city, he was still seen as nothing more than a suspect. Simone turned back to Blake. "Did you check the security footage?" Blake hesitated. "We were just about to." "No, you weren't." Simone cut in smoothly, deadly. "You were about to arrest him, without reviewing any evidence, without questioning him, without doing your job." Her voice was quiet, but the authority in it was deafening. Doyle swallowed hard. His hesitation had been there from the beginning, but now, with the weight of the situation pressing down on him, it solidified into something tangible. "Sergeant," Doyle interjected, his voice cautious, controlled, but carrying a tinge of something close to regret. "We should check the footage." Blake's eyes snapped to him. The unspoken betrayal was clear, but he couldn't argue. Not now. Not with who was standing in front of them. He exhaled sharply through his nose, jaw tightening. "Fine?" Catherine's face twisted in disbelief. "No!" she nearly shrieked. "I told you what happened. You're seriously going to listen to her?" She gestured wildly, first at Simone, then at Malik, her voice dripping with the same disdain she had carried all along. "You saw him. You saw how he acted. This is ridiculous." And finally, Simone turned to her. And in that moment, the power shifted. Catherine's defiance shrank under the quiet intensity of the chief's gaze, as if she was only just realizing that whatever power she thought she had in this moment was slipping through her fingers like sand. "Mrs. Whitmore," Simone said, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut steel. She took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Let me make something very, very clear to you. You are standing in front of a boy who walked into your store to buy a bracelet for his sister. Another step. A boy who saved his own hard-earned money to support your business. One more. A boy who you immediately labeled a thief because before he even spoke, you decided he wasn't supposed to be here." Silence. She let the words hang in the air. Let them sink in. Let them wrap around Catherine's throat like a tightening noose. And then, with a final chilling statement, "So I hope for your sake that security footage tells the story you claim it does." A pause. A razor-sharp inhale. "Because if it does," her lips pressed into a thin, knowing line. And Catherine swallowed. "You will answer for every word you just said." Simone's voice was a deadly line, each syllable sharp and final. Catherine swallowed thickly, her bravado cracking like fragile glass. Blake cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. "Let's check the cameras." No one spoke as the store manager, who had been standing frozen in the background, too stunned to intervene, hurried to the back. He retrieved the footage, the silent recording flickering onto a small screen behind the counter. It played the exact sequence of events. Malik entered the store. He spoke to Catherine. He handed over his money. The moment the bracelet slipped from his fingers, the moment it hit the floor, it was all there, every second of it. No theft, no pocketing, no crime. Just a 17-year-old boy trying to buy a gift. The silence that followed was suffocating. Doyle sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. Blake looked like he had swallowed something bitter, his jaw ticking with restrained frustration. Catherine looked as if the floor had been ripped out from under her. Simone inhaled deeply, her tone dangerously soft as she spoke again. "So tell me, Sergeant," her eyes locked onto Blake's, piercing, unwavering. "What happens now? Do you still want to arrest my son?" Blake said nothing. He knew better than to speak. Simone turned to Catherine, her expression unreadable. "And you," she continued, her voice colder now, "are you going to tell me what exactly you were so certain of?" Catherine's lips trembled. She looked from Simone to Malik, to the officers, and then to the customers, who were now watching with a mixture of shock, discomfort, and, in some cases, quiet satisfaction. Her voice faltered. She had no defense, no justification, just the realization that she had acted too confidently, too recklessly. Simone gave a slow, knowing nod. "That's what I thought." Blake cleared his throat, straightening his shoulders. "Ma'am," he addressed Simone, his voice tight with strained professionalism, "I think we're done here." Simone arched a brow. "No apology?" Blake's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Catherine, however, opened her mouth again, still searching for a way to salvage the situation. But there was nothing left to say. Simone exhaled, turning back to Malik. "Come on, baby," she murmured softly, her voice a stark contrast to the tension in the room. "We're leaving." Malik didn't move at first. He just stood there, staring at Catherine, at Blake, at the wreckage of what had just unfolded. He wanted to feel relief, victory, justice, but all he felt was exhaustion. Because no matter how many times he won battles like this, the war was never ending. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head, and finally turned to follow his mother out the door. As he passed Catherine, he met her gaze one last time. "All I wanted was to buy a bracelet," he said, his voice calm but firm. The weight of everything that had happened hung behind his words. "But I guess I got something more valuable instead." And with that he walked out, head held high, back straight, while Catherine stood frozen, watching the life she once controlled crumble at her feet. As Malik and Simone stepped out of Lancaster Jewelers, the heavy glass door swinging shut behind them, the tension inside the store remained thick, clinging to the air like the aftermath of a storm. The moment should have felt like a victory, a moment of undeniable justice. But as Malik inhaled the crisp afternoon air, his chest still felt tight, his stomach still knotted with something raw and unresolved. His hands curled into fists at his sides. His fingers ached from how tightly they had been clenched since the moment Catherine had accused him. His mother walked beside him, her presence steady, unwavering. Yet, he could feel the restrained fury radiating off her in waves. Simone didn't speak at first, her strides purposeful, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. It wasn't until they reached her car, parked a short distance away, that she finally turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Are you okay?" Her voice was measured, but there was an edge beneath it, something deeper than concern, something laced with the kind of exhaustion that only came from fighting the same battle over and over again. Malik let out a slow breath, glancing back toward the store through the window. He could still see Catherine standing stiff and motionless behind the counter, her face pale, her eyes darting toward the officers, as if searching for some last-minute lifeline. Blake was stiff, jaw clenched, while Doyle looked somewhere between relieved and ashamed. The store manager, who had been too cowardly to intervene, now looked like he wanted to disappear. The customers, who had once been quick to judge, were suddenly avoiding eye contact. They were suddenly interested in anything but the fallout of their silent complicity. "I don't know," Malik admitted finally, dragging a hand down his face. "I should feel better. I should feel like I proved something. Like I won." Simone studied him for a long moment. Then she exhaled, her features softening just slightly. "Baby," she said quietly, "you shouldn't have had to prove anything." The words hit Malik harder than he expected. His jaw tightened and he swallowed around the lump forming in his throat. "Yeah," he muttered, his voice heavy with emotion. "I know." For a long moment they just stood there, the weight of everything hanging between them. Then the door to Lancaster Jewelers swung open again. Malik's eyes flicked up just in time to see Catherine step outside. His entire body tensed. Catherine hesitated, her hand gripping the strap of her purse so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She looked different now. Smaller, stripped of the confidence and superiority she had carried so effortlessly before. Her face was stiff, her lips pressed together like she was waging an internal war. It was clear she had something to say, something she had debated in the moments since the security footage had exposed her. Malik's heartbeat drummed loudly in his ears as he waited. Catherine took a single step forward. Then another. Then she opened her mouth and closed it again. Her throat bobbed, her eyes flicked to Simone, then back to Malik. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she let out a breath and shook her head. Her expression shifted into something that could only be described as pathetic, wounded pride. I started," she began, but no words followed. She didn't apologize, she didn't admit she had been wrong. She just walked away. Malik let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Figures." Simone scoffed, folding her arms. Cowards never know how to say they're sorry. Malik watched as Catherine disappeared down the sidewalk, her posture stiff, her pace quick, like she was trying to outrun the consequences of her own actions. He should have expected it. He should have known that people like her never really faced what they had done, never truly acknowledged the harm they caused. But it still stung. Blake and Doyle exited the store next. Doyle glanced at them briefly before looking away, his jaw tight, his hands flexing at his sides like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Blake, on the other hand, barely looked at them at all. He just nodded stiffly in Simone's direction, a silent acknowledgement that he had lost this battle. Then, without another word, he turned on his heel and stalked toward his squad car. Malik exhaled slowly. "So that's it?" Simone glanced at him. "For now." Her voice was calm, but there was something more underneath it. Something that carried the weight of everything they'd just been through. Malik turned back toward Lancaster Jewelers one last time. Inside, the customers had already gone back to browsing, as if nothing had happened. As if just minutes ago they hadn't stood by and watched a black teen get accused of a crime he didn't commit, waiting to see what would happen to him. He clenched his jaw, then shook his head. "I just wanted to buy a bracelet," he muttered. Simone sighed, reaching out to squeeze his shoulder. "I know, baby." Malik took a deep breath, then exhaled, his shoulders finally loosening, if only a little. He turned away from the store, away from Catherine, away from the lingering weight of everything that had just happened. And he walked toward the car. Justice had been served, but the battle wasn't over. It never really was. As the car door shut behind him, Malik leaned back in the seat, exhaling sharply. The weight of everything that had just happened settled deep in his bones, exhaustion threading through his muscles. Simone sat beside him in silence, her hands gripping the wheel, her nails pressing faint crescents into the leather. The hum of the engine filled the quiet space between them, but neither of them moved, neither of them spoke. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had happened. People walked by, cars pulled into parking spots, the sky remained the same in different shade of blue. But inside, Malik could still feel the heat of Catherine's accusation clinging to his skin. The judgment in the eyes of those who had stood by and watched, doing nothing? Simon finally broke the silence. "Are you sure you're okay?" Her voice was softer now, lacking the sharp authority she had wielded inside the store. This was different. This was a mother speaking to her son, not a police chief demanding accountability. Malik stared at the dashboard, his fingers drumming lightly against his jeans. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice rough. "I feel angry and tired, and like none of this really matters, because tomorrow it'll be someone else in my place, and no one's going to stop to ask if they're okay." Simone inhaled deeply, her hands tightening on the wheel. Before she spoke, Simone forced herself to relax. "I know," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a cycle that keeps repeating, but today we've fought back. Today you didn't let them break you." Malik let out a bitter laugh. "Didn't I?" he muttered, his voice heavy. "I stood there, listening to that woman talk about me like I was nothing, while everyone else just let it happen. And even when she got caught, even when she knew she was wrong, she still couldn't say the words." He turned to Simone, frustration burning behind his eyes. "How do you fight back against something that deep? How do you make people see you as a person when they've already decided you're not?" Simone didn't answer right away. She stared straight ahead, her lips pressed together in a tight line. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but unshakable. "By refusing to let them define you, by making sure that no matter what they see when they look at you, you know who you are, by showing them over and over again that they're wrong even when they refuse to admit it." Malik clenched his jaw, looking out the window. "It wasn't enough," he muttered. "It never feels like enough." But maybe it was all they had. The silence stretched between them again, but this time it was different, heavier, more settled. Then Simone reached into her purse, pulling out her phone. Malik frowned as she scrolled through her contacts before pressing a name and lifting the device to her ear. "Who are you calling?" he asked, wary. Simone didn't answer right away. She waited, her expression unreadable as the line rang. Then, after a brief pause, she spoke. "Cynthia, I need a press release prepared immediately." Malik raised an eyebrow. "A press release?" Simone glanced at him before continuing. "Yes, regarding Lancaster Jewelers. I want a full investigation into the call that was made to dispatch, and I want an internal review on Sergeant Blake. I also want a public statement on racial profiling and misuse of emergency services. Make sure the media knows exactly what happened today." Malik's eyes widened slightly. "You're really going after them?" Simone lowered the phone slightly, giving him a knowing look. "You think I was just going to let this go?" Malik exhaled, something between relief and disbelief settling in his chest. He had spent so long watching stories like this unfold, the same way someone gets profiled, humiliated, accused, and then, even when the truth comes out, nothing changes. But this felt different. This felt like a fight that wasn't ending the moment they walked out of that store. He nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. "Good." Simone returned to her call. "Oh, and Cynthia, make sure Margaret Whitmore's name is included in the statement. If she thought she could do this without consequences, she was mistaken." Malik let out a slow breath. Maybe justice wasn't always immediate. Maybe it didn't come neatly packaged with an apology. But sometimes justice looked like accountability. And this time, he wasn't the one who had to carry the weight of it alone. 3 days later, Lancaster Jewelers was everywhere. News stations ran segments about the incident. Social media exploded with outrage. The store's Yelp page had been flooded with one-star reviews. Catherine Whitmore had been placed on indefinite leave, though rumors swirled that she had in reality been fired. An official statement had been issued condemning racial profiling, and an internal investigation into Sergeant Blake had been launched after body cam footage revealed how quickly he had moved to detain Malik without evidence. Malik scrolled through the news articles on his phone, barely registering the words. He should have felt victorious. But instead, all he could think about was how easily things could have gone another way. If his mother hadn't been who she was, if Doyle hadn't hesitated, if there hadn't been cameras, how different would his story have been? His thoughts were interrupted by a small, excited squeal. "Malik, Malik, look what Mom got me." He barely had time to brace himself before Amani launched onto the couch beside him, her wrist extended proudly. The silver charm bracelet gleamed under the living room light, the tiny charms dangling as she waved her hand excitedly. Malik's chest tightened. "You like it?" Amani grinned. "Are you kidding? It's perfect." She tilted her head, frowning slightly. "But I thought you were going to get it." Malik hesitated. His mother had clearly bought it for him, making sure Amani still got her birthday present despite everything. But the thought of stepping foot in that store again, of seeing Catherine's face, of being surrounded by the weight of that moment, had been too much. "I picked it out," he said finally, forcing a smile. "That's what matters, right?" Amani beamed, nodding. "Right." She flung her arms around him in a quick hug before dashing off to show their mother again. Malik exhaled, watching her go. Maybe it wasn't a perfect ending. Maybe there would never be a perfect ending. But in this moment, Amani was happy. And for now, that was enough.